Today is April 3rd, 2023. I want to talk about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. I want to start by taking a look at the map. This is liveuamap.com. It is a pro-Ukrainian map. Keep that in mind as we look at it. As we zoom in on the line of contact, we notice that the majority of the fighting indicated is in the Donbas region. There's fighting around Avdiivka. I'll get into that in just a moment. And fighting continues in and around Bakhmut. And you see these red rifle icons. That means there is fighting inside the city. And to get an idea of how the fighting in Bakhmut is going, let's look at this Guardian article just from the last 24 hours. Surrounded and outgunned, Ukraine's tank crews prepare for battle of Bakhmut. Western armor has begun to arrive, but many troops will still have to make do with old Soviet machines in the long-awaited counteroffensive. And they'll have to make do with old Soviet equipment because the number of Western-made battle tanks coming in is reportedly small. Again, these are Western-made battle tanks that Ukrainian troops had nowhere near enough time to learn how to operate effectively. Operate, yes. Effectively, no. The article says, as spring emerges from Ukraine's sub-zero winter, talk is turning to Kiev's prospective counteroffensive, on which the outcome of war may hinge. Russia's 10-month effort to capture Bakhmut, a small industrial city in the Donbas with no strategic value greater than its crossroads, is stumbling. Being a logistics hub makes it very strategically valuable. But it goes much beyond that even. I'll get to that in just a moment. It also says, meanwhile, in the past week, 31 Leopard 2 tanks from Germany, Sweden, and Portugal have arrived in Ukraine, as well as 14 Challenger 2 tanks from the UK. A Ukrainian D-Day is expected in weeks. And again, another aspect is the fact that there's two different types of main battle tanks. Actually, there's many more than that even. And they all require different types of ammunition and maintenance and training and everything else. It is a logistical nightmare, and it's for weapon systems the Ukrainians are not even familiar with. I want to get back to this part about Bakhmut not being strategically valuable and Russia's 10-month effort stumbling. From the very beginning, Russian commanders said that this was about drawing in Ukrainian troops and destroying them. That is exactly what they have been doing. There's this TASS article from October of last year explaining the approach of the Russian military in Ukraine. Russian troops persistently grinding down enemy forces in Ukraine, Operation Commander. Russian troops do not seek a high pace of advance in the special military operation in Ukraine and are persistently grinding down enemy forces. Commander of the integrated group of forces in Ukraine, Army General Sergei Surovikin, said, "We have a different strategy. It was highlighted by the Supreme Commander-in-Chief. We do not seek high rates of advance. We spare each soldier and are persistently grinding down the advancing enemy," the general told reporters. As Surovikin pointed out, thus, we do not only minimize our losses, but considerably reduce victims among civilians. They are taking a very careful, methodical, and incremental approach to moving across the battlefield, as opposed to rushing into enemy defenses, exposing themselves to artillery fire, autocannons, tank fire, anti-tank fire. They are using their advantage in long-range weaponry, both in quantity and also quality. Ukraine, conversely, does not have that advantage. They have no choice but to rush into prepared Russian defenses. And when they do, they lose huge amounts of men and equipment, as we saw admitted by the Western media during the Kharkov and Kherson offensives last year. They gained territory, but at the cost of an army's worth of men and equipment. And they have been waiting ever since for NATO to send them another army's worth of equipment and to train up another army's worth of men. And it is very clear that the US and its allies are incapable of sustaining this war effort. Logistically, Russia is able to. That's what makes it a war of attrition rather than a war of territorial conquest. And in that sense, the fact that Ukraine insists on keeping Bakhmut makes it very strategic indeed, because it is a very convenient way for Russia to draw in and destroy Ukrainian manpower and equipment. We hear the West constantly claiming that maybe Ukraine is suffering heavy losses in and around Bakhmut, but Russia is suffering even more losses. And we have seen even the Pentagon make this claim. But in reality, and I'm going to continuously refer to this article, this is the Kiev Independent, as pro-Ukrainian as media can be. Public data suggests over 16,000 Russian soldiers have been killed during first year of all-out war. This is dated March 4th, this year, 2023. And they are talking about since the beginning of the Russian special military operation in February 2022. And this is a joint project by BBC Russia and Media Zona. And this is the only serious attempt that I have seen in the West to attempt to ascertain the amount of Russian losses, 16,000 total. And even if you doubled that number, it is either around or less than what the White House, the Pentagon, and the rest of the Western media have claimed Russia has lost just around Bakhmut this year alone. Ridiculous and absurd levels of war propaganda. So this whole notion of Russia's entire military attempting to take Bakhmut and failing and burning out, and now Ukraine is going to launch its D-Day offensive. This is absurd. And that brings me to another point, is not the entire Russian military fighting in and around Bakhmut, is the Wagner private military company. It is supported by Russian military units, but primarily doing the fighting is Wagner. That leaves the other 350,000 mobilized Russian reservists waiting. What are they waiting for? We don't know, but we can probably guess it's to blunt the Ukrainian offensive or series of offensives, either in the Zaporozhye area, the Donbas region, or perhaps both, like last year, split between Kharkov and Kherson. That said, do not underestimate the Ukrainian offensive. When they launch the offensive, they likely will take territory. They may even take a lot of territory. Russia has repeatedly yielded territory if they believed they were going to suffer large numbers of casualties, if they felt they might be cut off from the main group, encircled, isolated. They will yield territory. They most likely will do that again during the upcoming Ukrainian offensive. However, what I want people to keep in mind as that plays out is the fact that coming out from behind their defenses, Ukrainian forces are going to be losing huge numbers of men and equipment, and this time NATO is not going to be able to replace it. And that is going to leave a depleted Ukrainian force awaiting 350,000 Russian reservists and whatever move the Russian General Staff decides to make from there on. Getting back to the map, that is Bakhmut. If we zoom out and we move south toward Donetsk City, outside Donetsk City is Avdiivka. Avdiivka was from where Ukrainian forces were shelling Donetsk City, the civilian population there, for the last 8 to 9 years. And now we see that it is encircled. The fact that it's encircled could suggest several things. But before I get into that, I just want you to note that this says Russian aviation conducted 2 missile strikes against Avdiivka. And we have been hearing more and more reports over the last month of Russian military aviation operating along the line of contact. And this has big implications. The encirclement of Avdiivka may even be owed to this increasing use of Russian military aviation, which up until now has not actually been carrying out many precision airstrikes during the special military operation. The encirclement of Avdiivka may also indicate the fact that Ukrainian forces are thinly stretched, overstretched along the line of contact. They've been trying to reinforce Bakhmut. They're trying to assemble troops for an offensive, and there may not be anything left to defend even vital fortified cities like Avdiivka. Getting back to the airstrikes, I think this is very important to explore. We have this from the Kiev Independent from March 5th, 2023, so early last month. Defense Express: Russia uses new 1.5-ton gliding bombs on Ukraine for first time. Russia has reportedly used new 1.5-ton UPAB 1500B gliding bombs designed to hit highly protected objects at up to 40 kilometers against Ukraine, according to Ukrainian military-focused media outlet Defense Express. The use of the bombs was reportedly recorded a few weeks ago in Chernigov Oblast, according to Defense Express. The targets were not specified, so this has been reported on in March. It started before March. Then we have this article from March 10th. Russia uses in Ukraine new UPAB 1500B GPS guided gliding bomb to destroy highly protected targets. And they're talking about the same Defense Express reports, but they add some additional details. According to Ukrainian defense website Defense Express, the use of this UPAB 1500B bomb in the Chernigov region would be an isolated case. But that is not what the Russians say, who claim that several bombs were recently used to strike fortified positions held by the Ukrainian armed forces in the Donbas region. The UPAB 1500B is a Russian-made precision-guided bomb designed to carry out precision attacks using GLONASS GPS channel. GLONASS is Russia's version of the GPS satellite constellation. The bomb has a blast yield of up to 1,500 kilograms of TNT and is designed to destroy hardened targets such as bunkers, command posts, and underground facilities. The UPAB 1500B is a highly effective weapon that can cause significant damage to enemy infrastructure and military installations. And there now have emerged videos of what is reportedly this UPAB 1500B, and the destructive power is immense. The article continues: the UPAB 1500B is dropped by the Sukhoi Su-34 fullback or Sukhoi Su-24 Fencer bomber aircraft, and this is important to keep in mind, at an altitude of approximately 45,000 feet, 40 to 50 kilometers away from the target. Its trajectory can be modified a few moments before reaching its target. What is the point of dropping a bomb 40 to 45 kilometers away from the target at that altitude? The point of that is to stay outside of short and intermediate range air defense systems. So that was March 10th. This is March 29. This is from Ukraine Pravda. Russians launch airstrike on Avdiivka, destroying kindergarten and damaging house. So we're talking about Avdiivka, which is now almost entirely encircled. I want to address the point of destroying a kindergarten and damaging a house. Let's look at this Amnesty International report, where even they admitted Ukrainian fighting tactics endanger civilians. Ukrainian forces have put civilians in harm's way by establishing bases and operating weapon systems in populated residential areas, including in schools and hospitals. And so when you see Ukraine Pravda talking about Russia bombing a kindergarten, it's because it's not a kindergarten anymore. It is a Ukrainian military facility. So I just thought I would clear that up. And then we have this more recently, April 1st. Russians strike Avdiivka, damage administrative buildings. So these are all airstrikes in Ukraine, and also several now reported in Avdiivka. And since these articles have come out, we've seen many videos of increased Russian military aviation activity. Before this, Russian airstrikes were very rare. Russia, in order to carry out precision airstrikes, would have to make sure an entire area was cleared out of air defenses before doing so. Mariupol was a city that Russian forces had encircled. They had targeted and destroyed any and all air defense systems in Mariupol, and then Russian air power was able to come in, and it was used specifically to target the Azovstal steelworks, which was used as a fortification by the Azov Nazis and other Ukrainian military formations. So when we see along the line of contact these glide bombs being used, that is a major development. Now, of course, we've seen videos of Russian military aviation operating all throughout the special military operation, but they were doing things like close air support, and that would be the videos you see of Russian warplanes flying very low in support of Russian ground forces. Russian military aviation is also used to target and destroy Ukrainian military aviation. So we've had Russian warplanes flying in Russian airspace using very long-range air-to-air missiles to target and destroy Ukrainian warplanes. Russian military aviation has also been used to launch these waves of cruise missile strikes and also hypersonic missile strikes. The Kinzhal is launched by Russian warplanes. Now, the reason why up until now we have not seen Russian warplanes carrying out precision airstrikes all across Ukraine or even relatively close to the line of contact is because Ukraine inherited a very formidable integrated air defense system from the Soviet Union. They have long-range systems like the S-300, has a range, depending on which missiles Ukraine had and was using, has a range between 50 kilometers to 150 kilometers. It is able to reach out far and target warplanes at a distance. It also has the ability to target and destroy warplanes flying at high altitude. The S-300 is mobile, but it's actually a complex of vehicles that have to be set up to operate. There's supposed to be one system within a tiered and layered network of air defense systems, and the number of S-300 systems that Ukraine has diminished greatly. They have been targeted and destroyed all throughout this conflict, and whichever S-300 systems still exist and still have missiles to use are most likely protecting high priority targets, most likely in Kiev and in other key cities and in other places where there is key infrastructure. They're not going to be used most likely on the front line. For force protection, the Soviet Union and now the Russian Federation have developed a large number of mobile air defense systems. Ukraine inherited several of these systems from the Soviet Union, large numbers of them. They have the Buk, which has a range of 50 kilometers. Asa, a range of up to 15 kilometers. Tor, with a range of 12 kilometers, and the Strela 10, with a range of 10 kilometers. When you're looking at these ranges, and if Russia is using a glide bomb with a range of 40 to 50 kilometers, it will be difficult, if not impossible, for any of these systems to target the warplane dropping it. These systems do, however, especially the Buk, they do have the ability to reach the altitudes that a Russian warplane would be operating at, which is why Russian warplanes cannot fly over the battlefield where systems like the Buk may actually be operating. A lot of these systems have been destroyed. A lot of these systems are running out of interceptor missiles. The US and its allies have been unable to replace these systems, both in terms of quantity and quality. The US has provided a very small number of their Avenger air defense system. This is basically Stinger missiles and some guns attached to a Humvee. And this was actually the air defense system the US was using in Syria when their base came under a drone strike, and the Avenger completely failed to protect the airbase. There are also a large number of man-portable air defense systems, like the Stinger. There's also Soviet-era man-pads, they're called, that Ukraine possesses. These are good for low-flying warplanes. These are good for helicopters, which usually operate at low altitudes. They are incapable of hitting a Russian bomber flying at high altitudes. So this means that Russia has these glide bombs. They're able to drop them 40 to 50 kilometers beyond the line of contact with relative impunity from these mobile air defense systems, which could pose as a threat but are reduced in numbers and capabilities to the point where there most likely are known areas where there is little to no coverage. And the further depleted Ukrainian air defenses become, the wider the area Russian military aviation can operate. These glide bombs, again, they deliver a huge amount of destructive power that Russian artillery, rockets, and missiles being used right now simply cannot match. But the problem remains. If these bombers fly past the line of contact and attempt to strike targets deeper in Ukrainian territory, these mobile air defense systems like the Buk are still capable of targeting and downing these bombers. In contrast, in Syria, the Russian military intervened at the invitation of the Syrian government, and one of the first things they began doing was using their aerospace forces to target the armed militants the U.S. was backing, target their supply lines streaming out of NATO territory, and namely Turkey. And by striking the supply lines, by striking bases, by striking troop concentrations, they were able to irreversibly collapse these militants' fighting capacity. This was a capability that gave the Syrian Arab Army and their allies fighting on the ground a decisive edge on the battlefield, and this is what allowed them to take one city after the other. And if you studied the conflict in Syria and the Russian military intervention, they did lose warplanes and helicopters. The warplanes were lost to accidents. There was also an incident where a Turkish F-16 downed a Russian warplane. But a lot of the other aircraft that were downed were aircraft like helicopters, which fly at a low altitude, and they become prey to these man-portable air defense systems that the U.S. and their allies were giving to these militants. But because U.S. proxies in Syria didn't have air defense systems like the Buk, and most certainly not like the S-300, these high-altitude bombers were able to fly virtually anywhere and carry out precision airstrikes. Back in Ukraine, Russia is very deliberately trying to dismantle the Ukrainian air defense system. It still poses a threat to Russian military aviation, and if they are successful in dismantling it, depleting it and dismantling it, then they will be able to operate more freely over the rest of Ukraine. A lot of people ask me, why doesn't Russia bomb the supply lines running over the Polish border into Ukraine, like Russia bombed the supply lines going to the militants in Syria? And the answer is Ukrainian air defense. It still poses a threat. It's definitely something that we should keep an eye on. It's something that has developed quite a bit just over the last month or so, and it's something that I think is going to play a very significant role in the upcoming fight.